Ladies and gentlemen, this is Pete Clark with the return of the Carrot Poker podcast. We have decided to up our guests to professionals now for a few weeks. We're going to be talking with the counterpart of myself, the tournament coach, the guy behind the From the Ground Up tournament course on Run It Once. Mr. Owen Shiels is with us today. How's it going, Owen?
Yeah, it's good, thanks. I'm great. Nice to be here.
Good to have you on the podcast, and good to be welcoming you into the show for the second time after my dog Smudge ruined our first take. Let's do it.
No worries.
My first question for you is, I kind of see you as the tournament version of myself in some ways, in that, you know, you're an essential coach. You've been making videos on Run It Once for a while, and you are the guy behind the From the Ground Up tournament edition. I obviously do the cash version of that. So why did we part ways so early in our careers then? Like, I can kind of think of some of the reasons that drove me towards being a cash player, but I'm curious, what are some of the reasons that you decided to take up tourneys?
So when I first started out, I dabbled in everything. Sit and goes, cash, MTTs, and I'm definitely the type of person who, if I went to a casino, I'm choosing roulette over blackjack. You know, just doubling my money on one hand is not really doing it for me. So I was always a bit more inclined towards that big score as opposed to sitting down and, you know, making 2 or 3 times my buy-in. You know, I definitely was attracted by that kind of portion of MTTs that you can sit down, pay your $10 and walk away with $2,000 or $5,000. So tournaments for me were definitely kind of the just the place that I started really enjoying poker. It was also my first book that I had of poker was Dan Harrington, which was 2005, 2006.
Yep.
I think Dan Harrington on Tournaments or something like that. He had a couple of series. So, you know, my first kind of learning experience with poker was also tournaments, not cash. So I guess that just kind of pointed me in that direction, and I've never really looked back. And anytime I've dabbled in cash, I've not done particularly well.
Yeah, they are like totally different trades, and it makes sense to early on in your career to choose one to specialize in instead of trying to be a jack of all of them, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember being like in McDonald's when I was about 20 and sitting there with a Big Mac meal reading Harrington on tournaments, and I actually left the book in McDonald's, and I was really gutted about it. Yeah, good times.
Yeah.
Being a blackjack player at the casino and being a cash game player, what you said makes perfect sense. If I played roulette, I would just lose control and I would go home in tears after about 20 minutes, I think. So I think that adds up. So
I mean, I'm not endorsing playing roulette in the first place because you're just going to lose your money. But if I was going to play it, you know, go to a casino and do that. It's definitely, I want that big win, not the double my money.
Yeah, that's what hooked me into roulette back in the day when I became somewhat of a roulette fiend.
A bit of a degen.
Used to work in casinos, and, you know, croupiers were barred from that kind of thing. We weren't allowed in any casino in the country for a while, and then it was like the great, you know, unleashing of the croupiers into casinos when they finally allowed us to do it, and we all just like ran in there, got very drunk, and lost all the money we had in like one night. And then, you know, you don't get paid very much as a croupier, so waiting.
That's the only time I ever actually play roulette is kind of, you know, 11:30 at night after a night out, and the casino's open. It's either go to the club or go to the casino.
Yeah.
And go to the casino, put down 20 or 40 quid and see what I come out with. Usually nothing.
It's such a good way to end the night. It's like, yep, not quite ready to get
like
like greasy food yet.
I'm not really a big. I've been with my wife and before girlfriend for coming up 20. Well, no, it's about 16, 17 years now. So we quickly went away from doing like the clubbing route to more like go out and then end up in a casino or something like that.
Yeah.
Clubs just didn't really appeal to me too much after I was about 22, 23.
Yeah, if I ever go to a club now, I look around and I just feel like that creep. Like, I feel like that old man just like sort of looking about the room, and like, it's lost its appeal somewhat.
I don't like waking up with ringing ears and stuff because I can't hear people, and then you just go, what? And they just shout in your ear louder, and you go, what? and they shout in your ear louder again, and then you wake up the next morning and there's just ringing in my ears. So yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of lost the love for that
I'm
pretty
pretty sure that alcohol scrambles my brain in a way where it's not just the loud music that stops me understanding. It's also like English doesn't make sense anymore. Like I can't decode the words. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So, going back to poker for a second, then you have been. What's your kind of backstory? So you've been playing professional poker for how long now?
So full-time professional poker since 2010.
Uh-huh.
So that's 10 years. It was 10 years in September that I've been doing it as a full-time profession. And before that, I've been playing since about 2005, I think. So we first started out when I was about 12. We used to play for pennies on the school bus
Mm-hmm.
until we got shut down. We got shut down by the school found out that we were playing poker for, it was literally 2p's. I remember walking around school with trousers, like with a trouser pocket just full of 2p's,
Uh-huh.
probably about, £4 and 2 pence and 5 pences and pennies and stuff. But they found out about it anyway, and we were not allowed to play again. And then probably about 2004, I saw my brother playing online. He was a big gamer, so he kind of played any game that came available online, and he'd found poker. And at first I was like, oh, that's gambling. I'm not going to do that. And then I kind of gradually just got into it from then. And about 2007, I started playing kind of part-time.
Uh-huh.
I'd started out a company with a few of my friends from university, a film company, which is still going today. And I was doing it kind of part-time and also doing that company at the same time for about 3 years, and then figured I was making more playing poker than I was doing the company. And yeah, just kind of decided to jack in that and take up poker full time. And I think I've been an essential coach on Run It Once for about 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Doing something
so
right then if they're extending your contract.
hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with the tournament lifestyle, like I was, whenever I talk to someone who doesn't play, I try to explain to them that your salary as a professional poker player is not this fixed thing. You can't say I make 60k a year or 30k a year or something like that. Like and especially in tourneys, that's so true. Like I'd imagine that your yearly income is fluctuating massively over the last 10 years. Or does it tend to even out because you play enough tournaments? Without going into exactly how much you make or anything, what's the variance like there?
The variance is huge. And that's what, like, when I talk to my students, that's one thing that really gets them is just how big the variance is in tournaments. Like, I've had years where I've profited six figures and years where I've profited minus figures,
Yeah. Yeah.
And as an MTT pro, that's kind of, par for the course.
Okay.
It's if you can't accept that, you probably need to be not doing MTTs for a living. But it is even like, 13 years into playing as a living, at least part-time or full-time, it can still be tough today. Like if you just go through a spell where you just lose. I guess it's the same with cash as well. You just go through some spells which are just horrendous.
Yep.
And you just go like, am I actually good enough anymore? And the problem with tournaments is, to an extent, you can track your stats and stuff and say, okay, well, I'm making XBB per 100. But in reality, that's not the entirety of the picture, because, you can be making XBB per 100 and be a winning player, but then you really suck at ICM and you're just like blowing your chances at the end of most tournaments.
Sure.
And you're going to turn from someone who could have 30 to 50% ROI into someone who has like a 5% ROI. And if you have a 5% ROI in tournaments, the swings are just incredible.
Yeah, you're basically just gambling at that point, really, with the tiny
Yeah.
edge.
So yeah, you really need to get to grips with every kind of aspect of tournament poker if you want to do this for a living.
Would you say it's a harder game then in that sense to learn, and that you don't just have to learn about EV and vacuum EV and how to make the most out of your range or your hand in each spot, but you also have to figure out this whole other like completely different backbone to the game, right? In ICM and just all the different places where that comes in and to what extent.
Yeah, so I mean, in one sense, it's harder because there is so much, I guess as a cash game player, your bread and butter is studying 100 big blind poker, or maybe slightly deeper or whatever.
Yep.
But you can centralize around that 100 big blind poker. But
Mm-hmm.
in tournaments, like, because the stack size changes so often, you kind of need to be aware of how to play lots of different stack sizes, especially short stack sizes, like 30 big blinds and below. Probably the best players in the world are pretty much masters of playing 30 big blind and less
Mm-hmm.
poker, and then taking ICM into account as well. And like, you can be kind of probably in MTTs, you can be mediocre to good in the deeper stacks, and if you're elite at 30 big blinds and less, you're going to do really well because you understand the part of the game where you spend most of your life as an MTT player.
Got it.
And yeah, I mean, I can't remember what I was going to say there. I had another point, but I've completely blanked it.
All good. That's what the host is for. The host tries to pick things up when that happens and forgets what he was going to say. That's why I've got this list, though. Yeah, so we've talked about like the choice, I guess, of whether you go into MTTs in the first place. So far, to me, I might be very biased being a cash player, but so far you have made this sound daunting, super high variance, yeah. Mentally destabilizing.
So that was what I was going to say, was that for one, there's more to learn as an overall picture.
Uh-huh.
Like when you just look at it, because it's different playing 10 or 20 or 30 or 40. However, I think what makes it good is that MTTs are by far and away the softest games
yep.
online anywhere.
Yeah.
Like there's literally, you cannot compare it. Even at the, mid to high stakes, the kind of 109s, the 215s,
uh-huh.
The high stakes is just ridiculous these days, compared to when I started.
Yep.
I'm not going to say a 25k is soft,
uh-huh.
but there's just because of everything that there is to study, I think people do a poor job of actually, kind of mastering tournaments.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, they are pretty difficult to learn to get to like the elite stage, but I think you'll probably win more as an average player playing MTTs than you would if you sat down and just played, 100 NL Zoom.
Yeah.
Which is going to be, I mean, I don't really play it. I've never really played it, so I don't know if it's like a reg fest but I imagine there's quite a lot of regs there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you sit down on a Sunday and play MTTs, you might be up against 10% regs, 90% recreational players, which is essentially, I guess it'd be the same for you. You make most of your money through playing against recreational players. Like, that's where your huge profits are going to come from.
Right.
It's people making massive mistakes. So if you want to make, if you're an average player, I would say play MTTs over cash. I'd obviously be biased that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's going to continue into the future as well, because I feel like the kind of your, Joe Public, they are going to be more inclined to go for like the big prize for that kind of significant cash, as opposed to sitting down and playing cash games, especially with the way that PokerStars and stuff is introducing all these gimmicky games, which I really dislike. Yeah, so I guess if someone wants to sit down for 15 minutes and play poker, they're more inclined to play like spin and goes now than they would cash.
Yep.
But they're also probably quite inclined to play like the Sunday Storm that has 20,000 for first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So there's definitely an upside that increases your win rate, which even though it's high variance, will reduce your variance again. High win rate equals lower variance, so that's going to balance out a bit. But even then, some years losing, some years winning. I just want to try to tap into your mindset here as a professional and try and figure out how you would cope with that, because for me personally, I'm imagining my mental game. I'm imagining trying to stay upbeat and get up and work and do my best every day and put practice hours in and show up and play my A game or close to it. And I'm just thinking I wouldn't have a chance in hell, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Which probably explains my path in poker. But how do you deal? Let's focus on one of those really bad years where you're actually in the negative. It's coming up to November. You know, it's very apparent you're not going to have a winning year. How do you rationalize that with yourself and keep doing what you need to do?
So I think it's something that definitely early on, probably about 2011, 2012, I really struggled with. Because I turned professional in September 2010 was when I went full time, and I absolutely smashed it. And then I think it was April 2011 was Black Friday. And as an MTT player, probably as a cash game player as well, but certainly as an MTT player, it just went from being easy to make a living, like ridiculously easy back then to make a living from MTTs,
Yeah.
to becoming much more difficult because everything was smaller. The people who wanted to play from the States and stuff, they moved, they were the good players. So anyone who had been a good player in the States moved out and played poker, and then you were left with the Europeans who were relatively decent, but we wiped out a lot of the kind of recreational player pool for MTTs. And 2011 and early 2012, I really struggled. And I think having that happen pretty early after going full time, and then getting out of it, it gave me confidence that even though, I probably had about an 8-month break-even stretch in that time. And one of the things about being an MTT player is like it's a lot easier if you've got money in the bank. So, it's it gets much more difficult if you haven't got much backing you up. And I ended up at that stage having to get backed, which is something that I think a lot of MTT players go through. And then I ended up being backed for about 3 years by various different people. Just because, so like my biggest downswing when I was in one of those backing groups was like 50K. And I'm not, that was with an average buy-in probably of somewhere between $40 and $50.
Wow.
Yeah. So might have been up about 60 by then, but I'm not sure. But like they were the swings that you can go on. And it's tough to actually just have that money in the bank and then be able to, play with full confidence. So I decided to stop being backed. Yeah, kind of went out on my own and chose lower variance kind of route once. So I had, me and my wife had our first child in 2016. And since then, I've been playing mainly on a small UK site called Sky Poker. And the reason for that is with kids, I do not have the time to put in sit down at 1 o'clock on a Sunday and play through till, 4 o'clock the next morning. That's just, I can't do that with 2 kids now.
Sure.
So I found Sky Poker, which has okay tournaments. Like they're not great, but the tournaments last for 3 or 4 hours. I can sustainably have a pretty decent ROI. I think every year I've held it at least over 30% ROI or above, which is pretty decent. And it kind of just allows me to be a bit more flexible with having young kids. And recently I've actually moved back. I'm getting coaching myself from one of our elite members at Runner Once. I'm getting coaching from Sam Grafton.
Right.
Because as the kids get older, I'm intending to move back to being able to play the bigger sites, the bigger tournaments. So to make sure that I'm definitely ready for it, I've decided to, put some work in with people who are doing it right now and doing it really well right now. Yeah. So
I think that's awesome, and it's such a mandatory attribute. I think you have to have as a poker professional is that humbleness to be able to say, just because I've been doing this for X amount of time and because I've coached all these players who are weaker than me, doesn't mean that it's not still this food chain and there aren't people that know more than me right now that I can then learn from. And then you're taking a bit of your bankroll, accepting that this guy can help you a lot. I just think that's something that so many professionals lack. They just have this mental block that because they're a
yeah,
pro, they can do it all on their own, and like I think that's a wonderful attribute to have, that humbleness.
I think also like um, because of my route that I wasn't one. I started playing poker early, but I wasn't one of the young kids who went out and like, got a grind house together and had big groups of poker friends. I've always kind of been like this single entity
Hmm.
who played MTTs for a living, but haven't really had too many, poker friends really online or in person. That I think the groups or the people who've made it the most are these people who've been kind of in a situation where they can bounce ideas off each other and feed off each other and get better that way. So because I haven't had that, I've had to have coaching. It's the only way that I can really get that kind of environment. Um, so one of my best runs actually was back in 2010. I went to Vegas and played like a couple of small bits of the WSOP that year. But mainly I stayed in a house for like 2 or 3 weeks with other poker players, and that was literally the only time I've ever done that.
Hmm.
And I had like an insane 2 weeks, and it was just because it gives you such confidence, like where you're sitting around and you play a hand, and then you can discuss the hand straight away afterwards with people who are, you know, either on the same level or just below or just above you, and you learn so much so quickly doing that I'm happy to have the family and everything, but that is one of the things that I feel like I've missed out on
Yeah.
that could have made me such a better poker player.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, um, yeah,
It's
coaching is the only way for me to do that now. So
it makes sense.
so
It
I,
accelerates things as well, doesn't it? Even if you could
yeah,
do it all
yeah.
on your own, do you really want, with your family and everything, do you want to spend every ounce of your free time grinding
Oh,
solvers when you could have someone to accelerate you?
yeah, I don't have that time these days. Um,
And even if you
so
did, it's not necessarily the best life
yeah,
choice. Like it's not the best thing for mental health a lot of the time for these players to go down this rabbit hole of, I will, I've seen it. I've seen it so many times as a coach. I'm sure
yeah,
you have as well. The student that rocks up to a lesson like, I will study solvers for 11.5 hours on Mondays, and then on Tuesdays I will
yeah,
grind
yeah.
19 hours, and you're just kind of like, yeah, and you'll last about a week doing that, and you'll sort of crumble, right? So it's a case of like trying to keep that life, family, work, poker balance. And I think a lot of professionals squander their opportunity at a really successful career by going too far down the, I'm going to do it all myself path.
I think they do, yeah, and I definitely see that with my students as well. Like one of the greatest things about getting private coaching is just not only for people who are recreational and want to get better, but for myself as well, just kind of giving myself a direction and focus, because there is so much that you can learn. Sometimes, like even when it got to my stage where I'm getting this coaching from Sam Grafton, I'm not quite sure with my own game, or I wasn't quite sure before getting the coaching, like where it's going to be best for me to spend my time studying, because that's one thing that I'm quite passionate about, is like, because of my lack of time with the kids and stuff, is being efficient with the time that I have. So if I'm going down those rabbit holes, you know, I can waste like weeks going down a rabbit hole if it's just something that really isn't that necessary. And if I could have been spending those 2, 3 weeks studying something which is actually going to make a real difference in my game, then that's really important. And that's worth the coaching in itself.
Yeah.
Like there was one guy who I was coaching, or I still am coaching at the minute, who he he loves doing the solver stuff. He loves getting everything in Excel and stuff like that. And then the first lesson, we basically just broke down everything that he was doing and just figured out that there was stuff that could make such a huge difference to his game just by keeping it kind of a lot more simple than... So he was making the transition from playing live to playing online. So making that transition, like there's quite a few things that you need to figure out, just like simple hand ranges and making sure that, you know, your 3-bet calling range, etc., that they're all, you know, solid. Because if you don't have a solid, I guess it's the same with cash, that if you don't, you know, you start pre-flop, if your pre-flop game is off, your post-flop game is going to be worse, and then your turn river game is just it's gonna have a knock-on effect. So yeah, when I'm doing my coaching, that's definitely like, I try and get the fundamentals down first, which is also the same in my course. Like, it's really about hammering home the fundamentals of like why we do this, that, or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'm guilty of sometimes, is trying to teach students something more advanced. I know if they could grasp it would help their game so much, but maybe they're just not quite at that level yet, and it's good to sort of go back and make sure you build up even things that they think they know but don't, for example. So I think I'm always having that battle where it's like, God, I really want to teach you this, but I know if I do, you're going to start using it in all the wrong spots. Like, I was teaching a guy range advantage and nut advantage the other day, like how to know, like, you know, when your range has a bigger advantage than average, when it has a lesser advantage than average, how that controls your overall betting frequency, and how you can sort of choose how often to bet certain hands from there. And then the first hand that the guy posts in my student Discord is something like, here's some fish going all in for SPR, you know, what, like 2, and he's shoving 2x pot on the turn, and the guy's like, not advantage on this flop, it's blah blah blah, and you know, this is just a fish like hammering 2x pot on the turn. And it's just kind of like, right, well, how do we get these across without people replacing their fundamental EV blocks with these more advanced ways of thinking? Because it's not about replacing everything with the most recent thing you've done in coaching. And sometimes as a coach, you experience this too, but do you ever feel like what you do most recently with someone over resonates sometimes, and it actually starts dominating their thought process in all kinds of spots where it shouldn't? I find that's always a battle.
So I have that with I have to be really careful with myself with MTTs as well. Just, you know, I've seen it with my students, but also with myself, in the fact that, you know, I'll go and study a spot and I'll figure out that, you know, I should be doing X, Y, or Z with this part of my range in a GTO world. And then I can kind of get the fundamentals or the mechanics that happen behind that and think about why. And then, like, you know, midnight, I'm sitting there playing against a fish and my mind goes, oh yeah, GTO, this one. And then, you know, if I don't catch myself going, well, this guy is not playing GTO, he's just an idiot who either is playing way too loose or way too tight in this situation. And I have to exploit him, not kind of exploit myself.
I think that's something we've all been through, where we end up, it's almost like the echo of the thing we've studied, because it's resonated so hard with us and so well that it's almost just like irresistible but to apply it, because it's created such a positive feeling. I was going to ask you, do you think there's another side to that as well? Like, on the one hand, we want to be refraining from applying things when there's a better exploitative strategy at hand, but on the other side, if we're too exploitative, and I think this is something my students do a lot, maybe it's the same in tourneys, but they just make things up. Like, they don't know where the baseline actually is at all, and if you don't know where that is, any read that you kind of posit on top of your arbitrary baseline is just kind of arbitrary, right? It's like going west when you don't know the coordinates you started at and trying to reach your destination.
I think that's definitely right. So the way that I try and apply poker, and the way that I try and get my students to apply poker, is to have that baseline, and you kind of exploit people a bit. You try and exploit them without them noticing, by, like, you know, a very easy cases, you know, you open 27% from the hijack or something like that. And you know, you've got tight players behind you. You don't just start opening 45%, 50% in that spot.
Right.
You're up to like 33% or something like that. You're just adding those fringe hands that aren't quite profitable under GTO to open. You're just adding those. And then I only start to make big exploits against people for two reasons. One is player pool tendencies, which you can get especially in low stakes MTTs. Like there are some certain, you really, I guess in cash, if you're making like, 20 pence on a hand or 20 cents on a hand or on a specific play, over time you're making that 20 cents. In MTTs, your chips are, back in the day, someone explained it to me like this: your chips are your army. If you put those into battle in a kind of situation that you're not really sure about, that you're not particularly happy, and it's not necessary to make, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, especially if large portions of the player pool are literally just going to hand you their chips, which often is the case with MTTs. So I only start making like massive exploits if I've got really specific reads on people. But I also do, with the player pool tendencies in MTTs, I tend to make sure that I'm not going to be, even if it's kind of GTO approved, I'm not going to be making a play that really isn't going to it's not going to net me much profit over time. Because it's just not necessary. You have to make it to the end of the tournament to win. You don't have to play the best GTO version of yourself.
The way you sliver, girl, send shivers down my spine. One thought of you, damn, knocks me right out every time. But lately I've been sleeping.
We interrupt this podcast very briefly to give you guys a quick look into the newest product over at carrotcorner.com. These are solver output ranges. The one on your screen is for either 50 or 100 NL 6 max cash. The difference between the two is pretty minimal, so we've disregarded it here. As you can see as I click through this slideshow, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're just listening, I'm going through some ranges right now. They are completely solver approved. As we go through, we can see various different spots, what to call, what to 3-bet, what to 4-bet, what to 5-bet. In every spot, these are sensitive to your rake structure at your stakes. They should form the absolute foundation of your pre-flop game, which, as Owen and I are discussing in this podcast, is incredibly important going forward. Head over to carrotcorner.com if you want to purchase these. And you can go ahead and grab them here by pressing this button. This will take you to an automatic checkout screen, or alternatively, if you want to visit my range store and view everything that's on offer, hopefully a bit more than this by the time you're on there, then you can do it that way as well. Happy ranging.
Now in the witching hour, I can't stand to see me now. A final curtain call, and I'll turn and take a bow.
Basically.
And if you're playing in a really tough field where there aren't going to be a ton of chinks in the pool's armor and there won't be these future situations that are really lucrative, you might have to embrace a few more of these very high variants, like this plays a bit better than that one, let's go with the GTO, right? But when you're playing in these softer pools, you can kind of just, if you do make that play, it's not even that you're risking a lot of your army for no real gain, you're actually losing a ton of your troops that you could put into a much more lucrative battle later, right?
Yeah. It's like, so I don't know how much you know about like shoving ranges and things like that in MTTs, but
a little, yeah.
If you've got 12 big blinds and you're under the gun and you've got a shove that is going to make you 0.05 of big blind over time, just wait. It's highly likely you're going to find a situation that is going to net you like half a big blind over time, which is 10 times as much, obviously. And you see it so often that people are, I guess this is kind of unique to tournaments, that people get these shove ranges and they're literally playing, using a range which they have on their, phone or on their computer or whatever, and really not taking into account the situation whatsoever. And that's like MTT poker. is really situational. Every situation is so unique that you can make a lot more by understanding the situation rather than understanding your exact shoving range for 12 big blinds under the gun.
Yeah.
And yeah, you really have to adjust a lot in MTT poker. So yeah.
I think that's such a big pitfall that students can fall into in any form of poker, like obsessing about the fine grain of some things instead of looking at how, studying one jigsaw piece in huge detail instead of just like, sitting back and seeing how the piece fits in with the rest of the pieces in the puzzle. I think that's what's missing from a lot of people's games.
Yeah, I agree.
Just moving on then, we could talk about strategy all day because I'd love to find out more about tourneys so that when I do my Friday night punts that I'm not quite such a fish. But let's talk a little bit about being a poker professional and having the family. You've got a 2-year-old. You've got, how many kids have you got?
So I've got 2. I've got a 4 and a 2-year-old.
Right.
So yeah, it's different for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to having them, just on a general Sunday, my schedule would have been like the latest I would have started my MTT session would have been about 3:00 in the afternoon. Quite often going through till 4 a.m. Registering everything up until 11 o'clock at night or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'd just sleep until I woke up the next day because I'd gone to bed at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Nowadays, my kids are up between anywhere from 6:30 till 7:30 every morning, and unfortunately we have 2 kids who haven't really understood sleep yet.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife hasn't really slept in about 4.5 years.
Oh,
so my MTT sessions now are based around being a lot shorter. I don't really get to start in the middle of the afternoon very often either. So I did for a while when we had help from grandparents and stuff, but obviously this year has been completely different, especially my eldest has gone to school now, so we can't be just within that bubble and then taking her to grandparents and stuff who are over 70. It's not going to happen. So this year has been, it was this year was the year that we were, both me and my wife were supposed to start getting kind of a bit of our lives back again.
Mm-hmm.
But then when COVID came, that has kind of gone backwards. So yeah, it's been a struggle this year. I've actually had a pretty decent year anyway, especially early on with COVID, that tons of people were just playing, tournaments and stuff. There was tons of people who hadn't played poker in 5 years, and they got nothing to do in the evening. So yeah,
quick question then: Have we bled that March initial lockdown influx dry yet, or are we still seeing benefits in the MTT pools from coronavirus?
No, they're gone. They're gone, unfortunately.
It's a shame that they don't last longer, these really horrible whales that play 92-12, but we can kind of see why.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think so it was interesting actually. I had a guy come to me for coaching, a French guy who he'd been pretty decent at poker in the late 90s, early 2000s, and had played live tournaments and done really well. Mm-hmm. And I think when lockdown hit, he decided he was going to give it a go again. And he actually stopped the coaching after a few sessions because he couldn't deal with how poker is today.
Yeah.
It's so different.
Yeah.
You have to be so on top of so many things, and it's not so he would have been a good feel player, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to cut it today. And I think that's what happened with the March, April kind of boom.
Yeah.
Is there was lots of people who came back and they just got slaughtered.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
I had a lot of students like that myself, cash grinders that were I play live, I played online, and pre-Black Friday, I'm now coming back, I'm going to take up the game again, and they were just absolutely, I just couldn't get them to learn. They were kind of just like clay that had already set, if you will,
Yeah.
and trying to get just if you've ever seen any of my stuff, maybe you've no reason to, but you'd know that I'm like a very theoretical coach. Like I'm very much like, this is what theory would say. If we're deviating, we can only do it because we understand what theory would say and we understand how this is different from that. And so with them, I wasn't gonna sort of adapt to their ways and like use field terms from 2003 or anything. I was kind of like, you have to adapt to this environment. Here's a bunch of simple GTO principles. And even when teaching that, I found that when they were analyzing a hand or playing live, they would always revert back to that kind of those crutches that they had, you know, in 2011, and they're still using terms like initiative and things that the community has maybe somewhat outgrown. And what do you do for people like that? Do you think it's a handicap if someone has played poker, you know, pre-Black Friday, taken a big hiatus and then came back? Is that harder for a coach than teaching a clean slate of a new player who's young and just coming up?
I think it probably is harder, but I think more to the point, that's just in life in general. If you're not able to adapt, you're going to struggle. If you decided you were good at poker 15 years ago, why do you think you're going to be good at poker now? Like, it's the same as anything. If you don't do it and don't keep up with it, you know, you're going to struggle. And I feel that's more of like a personal choice, that if you decide that what you did back then was good enough and you're not really going to take on what people are doing today. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I've outlasted quite a few people who are much, much better poker players in general than I am. It's just that willingness to kind of keep up with the times and find routes to do profitable things that is going to keep me doing this for a living, because it has completely changed from when I first started. And you have to be able to adapt. You have to be, like you said, you have to be humble and willing to accept that what you are doing might not be as good as what someone else is doing, and then figure out why that is. You don't have to figure out exactly what they're doing, but you have to figure out like why their strategy is better than yours, because poker essentially is just my strategy versus your strategy, and it's advanced really quickly through solvers, which I really wish weren't available. I still wish it was back in like 2012 when you didn't have solvers, because I think they have slightly ruined poker a bit.
This is where you and I
don't know if you have the same feeling, but like,
well, I mean, like for me, it's very different because I'm not a professional poker player anymore. Like I've set up my business in such a way that, you know, I'm doing 6 hours coaching a day, 7 hours coaching a day. I'm churning out content, selling books and things left, right, and center, and I've done that, I guess, because that's what I ended up being better at than being a grinder that locked himself in front of the computer for long stretches. That made me a bit mad, a bit insane. But like, I guess the reason that I feel completely the opposite to you, that I love solvers, I think the fact they came on the scene has made my job 50 billion times more enjoyable, is that back in the days before solvers, people just made stuff up and they passed it around like a flock mentality, you know. It was like sheep following sheep, and that was great for you, the player, the professional poker player. That was fantastic for you because you were able to beat all these people that didn't have a sound objective strategy. The reason that I love solvers is that as a teacher, it's really infuriatingly difficult to teach something with no scientific, objective, empirical truth to it. So to me, solvers now, because I study them all the time and I work with students on them, I can now say that I understand. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. I understand an objective entity, poker. I'm not just making up idioms anymore, repeating, you know, age-old wisdom about hands. I'm actually seeing scientifically what to do, rationalizing why, forming like a logical groundwork from there, and then I can take a brand new poker player and I can say, this is how you learn theory, this is how you be a poker player. Because I think this industry has suffered for a very, very long time, and still does to a large extent, from people who suck at the game pretending that they're good at the game. And this is everywhere. YouTube videos all over the place, various stables, training schools, famous so-called poker players, the old guard of poker players, most of them getting crushed these days if they even sat down at 100 NL6 max, you know? So for me, the
yeah.
solver has exposed a lot of the bullshit and flagged up a lot of nonsense as that, and that's why I really like them. I feel like I've got a trade now that I can work at. Like a painter can be good at painting, I can be good at understanding the subjective thing. But I totally get it for you. It has eaten away at much of the, you know, how lucrative the games are. To what extent do you think, though, that average regs playing $40, $50 tournaments, to what extent do you think solvers do their game good, or do you think that they actually might harm their games in some way?
I think long term they definitely do them good. I think MTTs were, you know, someone would come up with a new strategy. Like, I remember when I first started in 2010, I was pretty much one of the only players betting 1/3 on the flop.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone just bet half pot or pot.
Yeah.
That was it. And that worked really well, and there was only a couple of us doing it in the games I was playing at the time. And now, like, you know, even it's like a trickle-down effect that the good players study it and they know how to apply it, and then, you know, a player like me will pick it up either through coaching or through doing it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm teaching it in the essential run at once, and then other people pick it up, and then even like the fish see people doing it, so they're betting 1/3, and even though they don't know why they're doing it, you know, in a lot of spots they are actually making the correct play. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think these bet sizes that we now see why solvers are using them in certain common spots, that's definitely really harming the games compared to the old days, like you say, where it was weak or too passive or too nitty to bet 1/3 of the pot, right? But these days, like, are there any things you see people doing that they've probably picked up through either using solvers themselves or, you know, having watched someone else using solvers that they're misapplying that's costing them EV? Do you see any of that going on?
I think probably, especially in MTTs, you know, making big call downs on the river. Mm-hmm. You know, calling like check raises on the turn and the river, where, you know, just as a player population, you know, in those kind of spots, you're probably seeing 10% bluff, 90% value, and people are calling it down because they've got good blockers. Yeah. And I know it's something that I've done in the past as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, learn through experience that, you're not making money here. You know, someone shoves for 2x pot on the river, and I have the best blockers that I could possibly have, and I'm like, nah, I'm just going to fold it because they're just, you know, they're not bluffing even 50% as much as they should do. So that's probably one of the biggest ones that I see people make mistakes in.
It's so tempting when you're sitting there and you're like, well, I unblock all of the blah blah blah, and then you want to make the call, but like, really what's happening is, especially in spots where the range is filtered already, so there's been some action there's been some action on the flop, maybe he's had to call a raise or something, like he's already called a raise on like 7-3-3, and then it goes brick, you check the turn, he bombs, he jams river. What human, even good players, is constructing their range in a way where they're floating your flop raise on 7-3-3 with enough hands that they then are able to turn into bluffs for like a turn bet and a river jam, let alone the recreational player who has never even looked at pile solver or anything like that before. So I always say to students, like, look for filtering. Like, if their range is already naturally filtered away from combos that would make natural bluffs, don't bluff catch. And if their range is left sprawling, like it's left really wide, because all you've really done is checked the flop and called a bet, turn's gone check, and then you've checked the river and the fish has just bet 2/3 pot, just call with anything because he's drowning in natural bluffs, right? So I think like bluff catching is just so to do with not what people are doing, not like how often they want to bluff or their mentality, but just the math, just their base range. If their base range is overwhelmed with bluffs, humans will overbluff. It's like you get a blind man to pick a ball out of a bucket, there's 90 blue balls in the bucket and 10 yellow, what's he going to usually choose, you know? Exactly. It's a bit like that. So I think people need to put GTO on the shelf when it comes to looking at bluff catching, especially, like you said, it's a really good point. And they need to think about like what combos a very good question that I like to get my students to think in terms of is saying, what would he need to be doing in order to make you remotely interested in reaching a bluff catch frequency in this spot? Like, what would he have to be doing? And oftentimes it's triple barreling 4s for 3 streets on King, Queen, Jack, 9 or something like that. It's just stuff that's really, really unnatural to do. So I always say to students, think about naturalness, you know.
I think that's even more true in MTTs, where, like, you know, a bluff catcher by its very nature is not going to be printing money in general. You know, your bluff catchers tend to be more towards break even-ish, maybe a bit slightly profitable. And in MTTs, that's, like I was saying earlier, that's just not what we are looking for.
Yep.
We're looking for spots where, you know, shit, I'm making tons by calling this, you know?
You're playing on a table on Sky Poker with, like, 4 whales on it. Like, do you want to make a call for 3/4 of your chips against a reg that nets you, you know, half a big blind, when you could be profiting by 14 big blinds in the next spot you get into deep against some maniac or something? It makes a lot of sense. In cash, we can kind of go, oh well, I'll take the half a big blind here, then I'll also take the 14 big blinds in the next hand that comes up. But
it doesn't matter.
Right. But even then, on like a game such as Heads Up, it can matter. You know, you sit with a fish who's like punting left, right, and center. Do you want to risk doubling them up and have them quit you, you know, for like 1 big blind when they're playing so badly? So I think in some forms of cash, those points even carry over.
Yeah, it's another kind of example about why poker is so situational. And I think one of the things that people, you know, the best players in the world, is they can think through each situation and each kind of node on the tree. They can think through it a lot quicker than, you know, even I can. And that's, you know, they know this stuff, but then they can also think through it and realize what's important in each situation quicker than everyone else can, especially when you're playing like 8 tables. I play 8 to 10 tables, so if you're not thinking through this stuff quick, you're not getting to the right answer you know, in time.
100%. It's very much like really strong players, they don't have very elaborate fancy thoughts that other players don't have. They're just very efficient, and their machinery is very sort of oiled up to get what it needs out of each spot, like you say. As a coach, I've never really interviewed another coach about coaching before. It's always been me just being like, coaching is this and coaching is that. So what are your favorite things about coaching, and what are your biggest frustrations as a coach that you come across with an average student?
I think my favorite thing about being a coach is just kind of interacting with people who aren't always that much worse than me, but quite often, you know, they'll be much worse. But then it gives you an insight into how people think, which gives me, you know, an advantage at the table, because I'm going to come across people who are at kind of a similar level. And, you know, if they're thinking the same as these players, like, you know, just the classic thinking of like, I put him on ace king.
I put him on anything. As soon as that sentence starts, it's like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. Just like that level of thinking, and then the next level up, and like how they are approaching poker. It gives you a real sense for how to exploit people, basically. I would say the most frustrating thing about being a coach, I don't know, there's not like that much frustrating.
Okay, so do it for 7 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then I'll interview you again on that, and we'll see.
Okay, fine.
I used to be like you. I used to be like, I love coaching. I mean, I still enjoy coaching, but I will say the more you do it and the more it becomes like your job, right? Like grinding tournaments is your main job. Coaching one-to-ones is actually it's probably about 65% of my business at the moment is coaching one-to-ones. So it does become, I think the most frustrating thing from my point of view is people that don't have any chance of success ever. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't like to tell people that, but I think given how tough the games are these days, some students will turn up for coaching and it'll just be very apparent that they're probably not going to go anywhere, and I'm going to have to say that to them at some point and encourage them not to take more lessons. That to me is kind of almost heartbreaking, because I can see that they're really passionate and they're really like, they want to do this, but I just sometimes think that they'll be bashing their head off of a wall, even with their best interests, their best foot forward. They'll still be bashing their head off a wall for years. Have you had students like that who you've just thought you'll never go
I
anywhere?
definitely have had students like that. I've had a couple of students who, I'll go through some point of something relatively simple of like, I want to, you can expand your range and do that whole thing of expanding from like 27% to 33%. You add those fringe hands and they're going, but this, but that, but this. And I'm like, no, it's the points that you're bringing up are kind of immaterial when you take it out of perhaps this particular spot. Like I'm trying to teach you how to have a good strategy, not just now, but like any situation that you come across. If you start thinking about each situation as, this guy has this or this guy has that, or 3 hands ago this guy did this. Yeah. Especially when you're talking about online, like 3 hands ago this guy was, watching Netflix on the side while speaking to his girlfriend and didn't even see that you did that.
And if that's the basis of your train of thought, it's like these tiny shards of the game tree, or like when the students sort of like, but if I do that, I'll end up in some awkward spots, or it's like something that has no EV basis at all.
That's one of the things
it's a feeling,
That's one of the things that actually is probably one of the things that I try and get across to my students, is that especially in MTTs, when you get in the later stages, you have to do a lot of things that make you feel quite uncomfortable. Yeah. Whether it's folding like, king, queen suited in a certain situation, or whether it's like calling off with ace 5 off, or shoving ace 5 off in a situation where, all right, if I go all in here and I get called, I'm basically screwed. Yeah. But, to actually keep your tournament life going, and this is probably one of the biggest leaks that I see out of tournament players in general is, kind of the recreational tournament players is, they'll get to like 27 people left in the tournament and they'll just go, well, I've got a ladder up. Yeah. And yes, there is ICM involved, but Jesus, if you've got 30 big blinds with 27 people left, if you're just trying to climb the ladder, you're going to have 2 big blinds when there's 16 people left.
And I think that's why playing cash first is a good idea, even if you don't become a cash player. If you understand that, 100 big blinds is this norm where all these things are possible, and then you start to see what 30 big blinds actually is. Like when I see 30 big blinds in a tournament, I'm just like, oh my god, I have no chips. I have 0 chips. Like I have nothing. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to do
30
that.
big blinds. You're a big stack. With
you're a big stack relative to everyone else. But SBR wise, right? You have to be very willing to invest money, because you're going to frequently be in pots where the SBR is 2 or 2.5 or 1.5 or something. And what I saw when I like drunkenly play a tournament on a Friday night because I'm bored in lockdown is people just folding all the time. I'm like, why are my bluffs working? Why are people not stationing me anymore? Like, what's going on here? So I've definitely seen that firsthand. But going back to what we're saying, I think it's a huge thing where people think that because in life, right, when you feel uncomfortable about something, there's probably reason to. There's probably something wrong with that situation. If you don't like a person, they give you that untrusting feeling that's probably based on something. But in poker, you will frequently feel revolted, like you want to claw off your own skin, yet it will be the right play, right? And it's kind of saying, I don't care how you feel about it. Poker doesn't care how you feel about it. And yes, if you open 9-7 off in the small blind against this net, you will be sometimes in some uncomfortable spots, but you're making a ton of BBs.
I remember the biggest one I ever had of those was back in 2007 when I was literally, I'd play a Sunday and I'd play like 5 tournaments with the biggest buy-in of like $22 or something like that. And it was about 4 weeks after the Sunday Storm had started. It wasn't even called the Storm back then. But it had like $18,000 to first. And I think there was about 13 left. And I had probably about 30% of the chips in play. And another guy had about, 28% of the chips in play. And he open shoved under the gun. And it was this weird tournament where the blind level stopped. They got to like 200k, 400k, and they stopped. They never got higher than that. And this guy open shoved for what would have probably been 60 big blinds or something. And I had probably like 65. Everyone else was below 20.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked down at aces and I thought, I can literally fold to fifth here and make $3,000 from my $11 investment. Better sense came to me, and I did end up calling and beating him. We had shoved like pocket tens or something. But anytime calling with aces shouldn't feel that uncomfortable, but that really did. That felt really uncomfortable because I knew that the 18% of the time or whatever that he beats me, I'm going to be absolutely gutted. And, I think at that time I probably would have got like $400, which didn't make much of a difference. $3,000 would have made a difference, but like I did end up winning it for 18K, and that made like a big difference. So, but I still remember the feeling
having to
of
teach
just
people
thinking
that
like,
the last 7 hours aren't actually important. Like, I know you've been here for 7-8 hours and you've been building up the stack and you feel heavily emotionally invested, but what's really important, right, is that you have 9 of those big cashes this year, not 4. Like, that's what's going to make the huge deal at the end of the year, right? And it's trying to that's a struggle trying to get that into your students.
With MTTs, like top 3 is king. Top 3 is where the money is. You have to get those top 3. So that doesn't give you the it doesn't free you up to play like a maniac to get top 3.
Sure.
But it definitely does give you some freedom to be able to get away from that. All right, I've got 20 big blinds and there's 20 people left. I'm just going to knit it up until I get 8th. Once you realize that it's that top 3 and you start understanding which situations to actually put your troops into battle, it gives you that freedom, and you don't really think too much about it after that. And I guess like I've had about 13 years of finishing 11th. I'm used to it now.
There's not a big difference anymore between 11th and 38th.
It's still annoying. Like last night was kind of annoying. I got like, I think it was Party Poker have the Irish Poker Open on at the minute, and I'm not playing like the main events, but I played a PLO one because I've been using Vision on Run It Once just to mess around with PLO. So I thought I'd enter a PLO tournament. It was like a €109 buy-in, and I managed to finish like 6th, I think. And I got it in with someone needing runner in PLO, which is crazy. I had aces on like a 7-7-2, and he had no flush draw, no straight draw, and he just had like Jack, Queen, King, 10.
That's probably the best shape you will ever get it in PLO in your entire
in PLO, And he just goes Queen, Queen, I'm gone. And like, great, made €800, but like, first is obviously much more, but then it's like it's an Irish Poker Open kind of mini title. It's more like, and that stuff happens regularly with MTTs. And you have to just put it behind you, move on, and not let it affect you the next time you're in that situation to do the correct thing.
I think it's when you're inherently a bad loser, tournaments are probably not for you. Like, I'm a very bad loser, and so I can handle it if I have a losing cash session because it's just that one losing session. But when I go deep in a tournament and then something horrible happens, or even worse, I screw up a spot and it's my fault and I'm out of the tournament, I think I don't handle it very well based on... I could talk for a long time about my childhood and my dad letting me win at chess when I was 3 and how much that screwed me. But, we won't get into that.
So one of the things that I think is important is to realize that the strategy that got you there in the first place, if you realize that strategy can get you there again, like, I guess the reason why it's worse in bigger tournaments is because it's less likely that you get there again. Say you're playing the Sunday Million, it's less likely that you get to this point again, which is why people probably fuck up at the end of the Sunday Million more than any other tournament as kind of recreational.
Huge pressure,
And I had so I came 3rd once in the Sunday Million, but I had multiple like 25th, 30th, 15th. But once you realize that, well, one, that's the softest tournament online every week.
Yep.
And two, you know, if you're not, so if you're making the mistakes that are going to make you finish 8th by tightening up and not taking the spots that that kind of scare you, then you're not giving yourself a chance at getting that third, that second, that first. And you know, that third place was $116,000. That's like, and it's
year changing.
That's pretty life changing. That paid off a decent chunk of our mortgage and stuff like that. So, but you know, I had to play correctly, not, you know, tighten up and mess up spots. Yeah.
And that's also at the end of the tournament when you've already been focusing for 10 hours or something.
Yeah, that was 7 a.m. in the morning, and I'd been playing since 1 o'clock the day before.
It's a different skill to Cash, where you should, in theory, be able to access, you know, a tournament player that can access their A game at that time in the morning should, in theory, be able to play very well in every session of Cash they played mental game-wise, right? Like, it's a really... Cash is just so privileged in that sense. We pick when we play.
Yeah.
But you'd still be shocked at how many people rock up to that session shattered.
One of the reasons why I've struggled with Cash is because my main tilt comes through making bad decisions.
Yeah.
And then getting angry at myself. Not with like getting runner or whatever like that. If I make mistakes, I tend to get upset with myself, which I've learned to deal with MTT poker. Like, even last night I made an ICM mistake, but if I know I've made it, I can go check the situation and come back to it. Because I don't study Cash too much, I feel like I make a lot of mistakes, and then that kind of just frustrates me. It's
a much harder thing to process when bad things have happened to you and it's your fault. It's a double whammy of having to tolerate stuff. Well, Owen, I could go on and on. I could hear more about tournaments, but I've unfortunately got more work I need to do in making a product right now, which I'll briefly mention. It's by the time this podcast comes out, hopefully some of these will be available, but there's going to be some solver preflop ranges for various stakes of Cash for sale on carrotcorner.com. Going to try and make them quite affordable for you guys. So if you are looking for an absolute game theory backed up skeleton of what to do pre-flop, just head over to carrotcorner.com and check that out under solved ranges. So you can find ones for 50 NL, 100 NL, higher. I'll be doing lower ones at some point. Heads up will be on there. Check it out, give you a good foundation. Of course, as Owen and I talked about, you'll need to deviate from those as you see fit and use them as only a baseline, which is always important. And Owen, let's get you back on in the future one day when you've had your next Sunday Million win or something, and we'll get you on to talk about it and give us some more tournament wisdom. I think I understand a bit better now, like what the lure of tournament poker is. I think you're still mad to play it, but you know, I can sort of definitely see it more from the other side.
Cool.
All right, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's been good being on. Cheers.
All right, guys. Any more from me? Oh, do you want to quickly mention how people can contact you for coaching in case any Tourney players are looking for a coach just before we go?
Yeah, you can contact me either on Run It Once. You'll find me on there as Owen Shiels, or Twitter, Aussie Owen Irish, OZZIEOWEN Irish is my handle on there. And just, shoot me a DM or whatever, and we can set something up.
And if you want to be on this podcast, get in touch, admin@carrotcorner.com. Just shoot me an email or head over to carrotcorner.com to check out all the rest of my products, books, coaching services, things like that. See you guys on the next episode, and bye-bye for now. Thanks for watching.
One thought of you, damn, knocks me right out every time.